Okay. So you'll start and I'll try to make sure it's on. No, where is she? Oh, I see Danny and Tova. It's kind of
the person that you mentioned about the temple that I was like, I don't have an immediate picture, like face for the name was Ruthie.
because she left. Do you know I reconnected with Ruthie because someone knew who she was and connected me to her, and so I talked to her for the first time 2 weeks ago after 40 something years.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. It is kind of funny.
Like when you mentioned Joe and then you mentioned Tova, I was like, of course he's like.
Yeah. I want to do like a picture with people who are my age, of my era, that grew up, because there are a bunch of them here. There are like a dozen of us. It's very sweet. Sure. Or just. It doesn't look like this is on, does it? It is. With the red. It is? I mean, you do something that you. Is it on? It's not on. Testing? Testing. Hello? You know what people know, so. Oh. Testing. Not testing, testing. Testing.
Good evening, No, it's not going through
Is he
at
a
all.
volunteer or?
He's a volunteer.
Yeah. You are?
Okay. Because I'm not hearing.
Hello?
Is the speaker plugged in?
There we go. Testing, testing.
Give it a second. Testing. Now it's on.
Testing. Oh, there we go. There we go. Okay.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
You know, I was told that Rabbi Rosenthal would have the sanctuary completely silent, and then he would walk in to a completely silent sanctuary.
I don't remember that. Is that really loud? No. These are Jews. They talked. Yeah.
Okay. It is so wonderful to have a completely full sanctuary. I believe there are, in fact, more people here tonight than there were on Kol Nidre. I am Rabbi Karen Gorbin. I'm the rabbi of Temple Bethel. I've been here for about 3.5 years, and it is my pleasure to welcome back to this bima Rabbi Angela Warnick-Buchdahl, our homegrown hero.
Thank you. I have to say, it is very trippy to be here right now. I mean, just in the best way possible, to be here with Rabbi Rosenthal's daughter and daughter-in-law, with my religious school directors, with Joan Garden and Tova Achdut, and I feel like I know what it was like to go back into their offices and to feel it. And so many people in this room taught me, many people of my era that I was in Hebrew school with and in BBYO with, my family members, some who surprised me and showed up, and just to see people that I've grown up with my childhood, and I am just reminded of what a gift it was to grow up in this community, and I really feel the love, and I have to say that I think this is my 26th city of this book tour. I basically only have one stop. I mean, we're counting Seattle as part of this stop, and then I only have one more city afterward. But this to me feels like this was the one I was looking forward to the most to come back home. So thank you so much for listening.
So I don't know how many of you have had the chance to read Heart of a Stranger yet, but it is wonderful. As I was saying over dinner, I basically cried my way through the book. But you start off your book with a vignette about Jeopardy, where you were the $800 clue for I Am Woman. And you describe how you could not have imagined such a reality when you were a child growing up here. Yeah. And so because I actually know that while there are a lot of Jews in this room right now, there are also quite a few people who are not Jewish. And so I'm wondering if you can share a little bit, also you've described it so beautifully, what is a rabbi?
Yeah. Yes, so what is a rabbi? A rabbi is literally a teacher. And so to be a rabbi is just to be a learned member of your community who teaches others. And in the very beginning in the Bible, we didn't have rabbis actually. We had priests. And the way we practiced Judaism was by actually sacrificing animals on an altar. But once the temple was destroyed in 70 CE, rabbis became the spiritual leaders of the community and main teachers. And so for about 2,000 years, rabbis have been the leaders of the Jewish people. And for almost all of those 2,000 years, rabbis have always been men. And I would say also that they never ever looked like me. So imagine my surprise when the Amy Schneider, who was the reigning Jeopardy champion, her question was, Korean-born Angela Bookdahl was the first Asian American cantor and this leader of a Jewish community. And so I was like, if you had told me when I was a 5-year-old growing up here as a recently immigrated Korean with a Buddhist mom and a Jewish father, I'm growing up in the Jewish outpost of Tacoma, Washington, that I would one day be the Jeopardy answer to what is a rabbi, I would have said there is no way that's possible.
So what allowed you to become a rabbi?
So I will say in this room that I think that having Rabbi Rosenthal as my rabbi both made it feel like, I mean, he's definitely in so many ways part of the reason I'm a rabbi, of course, not just because he was the model of what it is to really invest in a community, to be with us for all of our life cycles. He was here for more than 40 years as our rabbi, but even more than that beyond. And it was such a gift for a community like Tacoma to have a rabbi come and do his entire career with us. And he was, of course, brilliant and funny, and he told great stories. I do joke that he was really tone deaf, which he was. But that's okay, can't have everything. And he was also, I would say, he was like, he also was the first person to suggest to me, did you ever think about being a rabbi? Which he said when I was preparing for my bat mitzvah with him. And which was always fun because it didn't matter what I sang. Rabbi Rosenthal was like, that was beautiful. So that was the tone deaf part, that helped. And then anyways, but he was so encouraging of me. The part that I would say that was hard to imagine is that if you've seen the portrait outside on the wall, I hope, if you didn't grow up with him yourself, which many people in this room did, he was like out of central casting for rabbi, right? And had this incredible backstory of leaving Germany after Kristallnacht with his family and the sense of calling of being a rabbi. And he just looked and sounded like a rabbi. And I remember that, like, well, you look at me, and I was like, well, that's a rabbi. How could I possibly do that? And when you grow up in Tacoma, I didn't know any other rabbis. I didn't have any other model, and he loomed very large. And I think that there was a certain way that also became a way that it felt almost impossible to imagine that I could do what he was doing. And so ultimately, I did come around to understanding there could be lots of different ways of not just looking or being a rabbi, but he in many ways sort of set the standard for me, and I'm so grateful that he was my first. Yeah.
You also write about not just not seeing other rabbis that looked like you, but also challenges to your sense of identity, and both the self-doubt and the communal challenges. And so I'm wondering what kept you going despite all of those challenges.
So, I mean, I will just point out that I think it's really very, very fortunate that my family moved back to Tacoma in 1976, I think it was. And essentially that was just around the time that the Reform movement was changing its attitudes about interfaith families. For just a little bit of context, especially if you're not from the Jewish community, in the 1970s, the Jewish community really looked at interfaith marriage as one of the biggest problems that we had. And it was not unusual for families to sit Shiva, which is essentially go into mourning practices if a Jew married someone outside of the Jewish community. And in that time in the 1970s, 92% of the children of interfaith marriage were completely lost to Judaism. Only 8% actually identified as Jewish at all. It was in this era that Rabbi Alexander Schindler, who was the president of the Reform movement, in this time gave this incredible prophetic and visionary and controversial outreach sermon in which he said, we shouldn't be doing this. We should be welcoming interfaith families. We should be outreaching to their children and educating them in our schools, and we should consider anyone who has a Jewish parent Jewish no matter what, because the traditional definition was you had to have a Jewish mother. But he also said patrilineal descent counts. So think of how lucky I was that I basically arrived in Tacoma with Rabbi Rosenthal, who embraces my entire family, including my mother. To grow up in Tacoma as a Warnick was also a great thing, because it was like, you know, there were all my cousins around. My grandmother was just a matriarch in the temple. I saw, like, you know, all of my cousins are on the wall of confirmation and consecration pictures, and there was a sense that I had yichus here. Yichus meaning like lineage, good roots. Like I felt grounded. I was already the fourth generation to become bar bat mitzvah in the Tacoma community, and so I really felt deeply rooted here. So I think what kept me going? I mean, first of all, this was the kind of community where it felt like family and coming home to this place. I'm here, and Hillary Pallett is my best friend, and she was, and her sister and mom are here, which is so beautiful. And, you know, we love being like the two Jewish kids in our grade that like took the bus to Hebrew school together, and we loved coming, and we loved that Joan Garden made Hebrew school so fun for us, and then Tova took over and made it joyful, that I learned how to song lead, and Rabbi Rosenthal let me get up here with a guitar and lead the congregation when I was a kid, and I felt like I found my voice in this community. So I think it was all of those things, feeling a deep sense that I had not only my family, but my extended family was taking care of me, and I loved being Jewish. So, and when you grow up in a place like Tacoma, and I'm sure it's still this way to this day, when Hillary and Gina and I were like the three Jews at the time that I was at Stadium High School, you feel very strongly that you are, oh yes, I'm sorry, the Weinsteins, Erica and Michelle, I'm so sorry. Thank you very much. There were 5 of us, yes, and we were in, and you feel like when you are in that kind of an environment, you feel like you are responsible for carrying on Judaism, and that and if you're not doing it, that no one's going to know who we are, and it's not going to carry on. So sometimes, you know, I now serve a congregation that is, you know, there are more Jews in, you know, at Central Synagogue than like practically in like in most of Washington State or whatever. I don't know. It's just a lot of Jews, and it is a crazy thing to grow up in a place like New York, which in some ways obviously is so Jewishly rich, but also in other ways it is so easy for all of our kids to just take it for granted, to feel like they don't need to necessarily carry it on. I can't even tell you how many Jewish kids in Tacoma, I'm sorry, in New York, don't necessarily belong to a synagogue, don't necessarily become bar bat mitzvah, are really happy to have, I don't know, it feels very different. I couldn't believe how many Jews who grew up in New York who had two Jewish parents all grew up with Christmas trees. And I remember if you grew up in Tacoma, that was a very different thing because you felt like you had to kind of really hold on to your Judaism. So
I'm dealing with that right now, my 5-year-old.
Your 5-year-old, yeah. Listen, I get it. Christmas trees are great. But
Yes, just this week when we were going to put up our Christmas decorations, and I had to explain that.
Well, I was just talking with my cousin Greg about the fact that my Aunt Sandy, she didn't want us to feel like we were left out. So she was like, let's make Hanukkah decorations. And we made strings of dreidels, and she made blue tinsel, and our house looked really super cool and decorated for Hanukkah because she was like, we don't have to miss out. We can make this fun and joyful. So, and I think we had kind of like a Hanukkah bush, but anyway, it's like a...
And so as you got older and you started experiencing Jews outside of Tacoma and Judaism outside of Tacoma, what were some of the challenges that you faced and how did that affect your journey?
Yeah. So I was really lucky that my Aunt Lily clipped a Hadassah magazine article and I think my cousin Todd was working for the Bronfman Fellowship, but Aunt Lily was like, you should apply for the Bronfman Fellowship. It's a free trip to Israel. And I was like, okay, that sounds great. And they couldn't find any other Korean Jews from Tacoma, so they picked me. And they did want diversity, and I was from Tacoma, and anyway, so, and I was already like BBG, president of our chapter here, and had been song leading. So I was already like in some ways feeling very Jewishly connected. But this was a pluralistic program. What that means is there were Jews who were Reform Jews and Conservative and Orthodox Jews, and they were from all around North America. And I would say that it was deeply challenging for me in two different ways. One, it was the first time that I was meeting Jews whose lives were like 100% Jewish, it felt like. So my Orthodox roommate, she grew up in a town called Brookline in which the entire neighborhood in which she lived was completely Jewish. She also went to an Orthodox Jewish day school. So all her friends were Jewish. She lived on a Jewish calendar. She was fluent in Hebrew. She already knew how to study Talmud and like Jewish texts. And the rock music she listened to was Jewish rock music. I didn't even know that existed. And then she also crocheted kippot in her free time. And I was like, wow. That is a really Jewish life. And she started asking me about my life, and I was embarrassed to tell her when I said that there were so few Jews and named them. She was like, you mean there's not even one Jewish boy to date in your entire high school? And I was like, that's not what I'm going to tell her about my non-Jewish boyfriend, or the fact that I had that I was like, I played in the Stadium High School marching band, and so I was playing a lot of football games in Stadium Bowl on Friday nights, and she couldn't believe that that's what I was doing on Shabbat. And it was challenging in the sense that her life was like so fully Jewish in every single aspect of it, and it made me feel like, well, but my life has a lot of other pieces, so maybe I'm not really Jewish. I'm not authentically Jewish. But it got worse than that because at some point we had to actually negotiate how we wanted to observe the Sabbath in our room. And if you're an Orthodox Jew, you have restrictions on electronics and lights and many other things that are part of Sabbath observance. And so we were talking about it. I said, I like to listen to music. She goes, well, that goes against Jewish law. It's hard to argue with that. So but at some point she said, Angela, I can respect your opinion as a person, but not as a Jew because you're not a Jew. And now, that sounds really cruel, and I can tell by your response that was kind of how I felt as well. But what I would say is that, no, is this okay? Is it coming in and out, or is it okay?
It's going in and out.
Okay. I'll use this.
Try now.
Is this on? Is it on now? Oh, yeah, okay. So, and maybe I'll turn this off. I don't actually think that she meant it to be cruel. I think that she came from a Jewish community in which there were just rules and boundaries, and this was one of them, which was that your Jewish status is traced through your mother's line. If you don't have a Jewish mother, you're just not Jewish.
And but she said that to my face in a way, and I guess I grew up in such the warm bubble of Tacoma and our Reformed community that this was a shock to me when I got there. And it was also, you have to understand that I came to Bronfman feeling like I was the super Jew. And it was a huge part of my identity. So for that to be suddenly, it felt like the rug had been pulled out from underneath me. And it was not just that there was that external definition. I would also say that internally I was going through a lot of Jewish identity crisis because I felt like my life wasn't as Jewish as hers in pretty much every single way. And that set off an identity crisis that I would say lasted for the next 5 years, all through college. That being said, I also fell in love with Israel for the first time when I was living there. I fell in love with Jewish text learning. I couldn't believe how exciting it was to study like a traditional commentaries around a piece of Talmud. Was the first time I was exposed to that. And it was such exciting learning. And you could be thinking about the biggest questions of life and meaning and why we're here. And you could even look at commentaries from rabbis from hundreds of centuries ago and see that they were thinking about the same questions. And I was like, wow, there's a job. It's being a rabbi where this is what you get to do with your life. You get to think about these big picture questions and look at these texts and make community. And so as hard as it was to be so challenged and to feel so kind of insecure in my Judaism at age 16, I also came back from that summer and announced to my parents that I wanted to be a rabbi. So that was, and basically, I could not think of anything else I wanted to do with my life from that moment on. That was it. And so I stuck with it, even though over the next 5 years, there were times where I was like, I'm not even sure I want to be a Jew anymore, but I still wanted to be a rabbi, so I had to stay in it. Yeah.
So you're not one of those people who had if I wasn't going to be a rabbi, I would be this other thing.
No, I mean, when I was a kid, I had plenty of things I wanted to do. Be a professional musician, be a teacher. But once I actually kind of landed on this, it was really strongly what I felt. As you might imagine, my dad was very supportive. My mom, who always said, you can do anything you want, Angela. She was sort of like, you can do anything you want, but why would you want to do this? And sort of like you've got 3 strikes against you. You're a woman, you have a non-Jewish mother, and you're Korean. And it wasn't that I think, my mom didn't think that she knew that I could do it, meaning I don't think she doubted that I could become a rabbi. I think she doubted that the Jewish community would be ready to accept me as a rabbi. And she kind of thought, who's going to hire you? How are you ever going to get a job? And so it is pretty ironic that I now lead this giant congregation in New York City. So I did eventually get a job.
And are the face of what is a rabbi.
And now the face of what is a rabbi.
One of the things that I resonated with when you were sharing about the experience growing up and also becoming a rabbi and coming back home where the way you grew up was not always conducive to Jewish practice. And in particular, the kashrut thing for my own family, one of my dad's big rules was you have to come home and eat what I make for you.
Yes, I mean, this is really hard. I mean, in my family, and the Korean side of my family, food was love, and it was like an expression of love. So when I got to college and I really wanted to keep kosher style, it was like my way of identifying myself as a Jew. Kosher style just meaning I was willing to eat chicken that wasn't hechshered, kosher certified chicken, but I would eat chicken, but I wouldn't eat pork, or I wouldn't eat shrimp anymore. Anyway, of course, these were my mom's favorite foods. And so, basically you can't even cook Korean food without shrimp paste in it. Even kimchi has shrimp paste in it. And so, anyway, I came home and it's like, Mom, I'm keeping kosher. And she goes, why are you doing that? And then she serves me a salad that has some shrimp in it. I was like, Mom, this salad has shrimp. She goes, wow, it's just a little bit of shrimp. I was like, Mom, that's not how it works. So anyway, she was like, why are you giving that up? All the delicacies. Anyway, so, but I think what I realized was it was in some ways, it almost felt like it was a rejection of her love, because this was part of it. And part of the reason that I never kept strictly kosher, meaning if you keep strictly kosher, you won't even eat soy sauce that doesn't have like an OU certification on it or whatever else. And part of that is that like I knew that it was going to be very important that I could still eat in my mother's house or eat in my emo's house or my Korean cousins' houses, that like I was gonna not eat anything that looked like a shrimp, but I was not going to also interrogate every ingredient and feel like I couldn't be a part of sharing with family meals, because that also feels really important. So I have like my own reform version of keeping kosher, of course, but I still think Mom literally served me today something that had seafood in it. I was like, Mom, there's squid in this thing. She's like, I don't think so. I was like, Mom, I ratted you out, but you still don't care that I want to do that.
I have heard it called Pacific Northwest Kosher before.
Pacific Northwest Kosher. Okay. Maybe I can do house rules when I'm here. Okay.
Early on in your book, at the end, even in the introduction, you describe what the responsibilities of a rabbi are, and that was one of the places where
You cried.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And so one of the questions that I get asked frequently is, what do I love most about being a rabbi? So I'm going to turn that question back to you. What do you love most about being a rabbi?
Oh, can I hear your answer first? No, seriously, I would think it would be so nice.
So I often say, and it's very hard to say in a large congregation or community, like, I actually really love doing funerals. It's not because I love people dying. It's because it's one of these moments where you get to be with a family in the most intimate moments and hardest moments of their lives and create meaning and beauty out of this hard time. So that is, it's the funerals.
Yeah. I would definitely, that resonates for me a lot. I just want to take this moment to just say that it is not always easy to be a rabbi of a congregation. It's hard to be sometimes, especially to be a rabbi following great rabbis that have been in this community. And I know Rabbi Cadden is here too, right?
Yeah.
Right, thank you. And I want to say that when you arrived here, I was so thrilled, and I know that you're building some wonderful new energy and bringing in new young families, and this is exactly what this community needs, and I'm just so thrilled that you are the rabbi here at Temple Bethel. Yeah. And strength to you, because being a rabbi is hard. I will just say that it's also really so meaningful, so gratifying, and many times so joyful. And I do think that maybe one of the most meaningful things, and it was the model that Rabbi Rosenthal set for me, was that you were with families, yes, for funerals, but then for that next generation's baby naming that comes up, and then getting to watch them grow up and become bat mitzvah, and then doing their weddings. It's like, it's not just any one of the single ones. It's about being in it for the full cycle of a family's life. And then when you get to do that bar mitzvah and the grandparent dies, that like, then you just feel the ways that like you can kind of carry the memory of those who are not there anymore because you knew them and you were part of that. So there's something about that. I do talk in this chapter, I made myself watch my bat mitzvah video preparing for the book just so I could remember. And I don't know why I didn't remember that my first aliyah I gave in my bat mitzvah was to Greg, my cousin Greg, who of course was my cool cousin. And but I did, of course, remember that his bar mitzvah had been a year before, and my Uncle Al had died in between his bar mitzvah and my bat mitzvah, not that much later. But this feeling that, like, this community knew my Uncle Al and loved him, and that we were kind of carrying all this together, and then to feel like I could give this honor to my cousin. I'm not even sure I would have acknowledged, like, or been mature enough to fully understand what all of that meant when I was 13, but that sense of like an aliyah being like, it's literally a stepping up into something. That's what aliyah means, is to literally rise up, and to watch my cousin rise up in that moment and be surrounded by our community, and then to have my chance to do that too. Like, it's something about that felt so deeply meaningful in that moment. So I think for me, it's not just about one event, it's about being in the full life cycle with a community and then watching the way the community takes care of each other. I think at our best, this is what Tacoma's Temple Beth meant for me. And I pray and hope that that is actually what it still continues to be for all of you.
And hopefully I'll be here long enough to actually
to do all of that. Well, and and this family's going to help raise your little boy,
Yeah.
who I already have seen. I saw crawling underfoot when I was here 3 years ago, and now he's so big already. And so, that's also part of the joy of it too.
Yeah. So in that same chapter, you talk about feeling a sense of rootedness in your Jewish identity. But it's also interesting to see in a number of other chapters how you reconnect and find rootedness in your Korean identity.
Yes.
Well, so, I think you probably know that we had about, 300 families at Temple Beth when I was growing up. Is that probably about right? Yeah. And my mom, my mom married my dad not knowing that we were going to end up in, that we were going to end up in Tacoma, I guess. And it's interesting because if my dad had been from like Boise, Idaho, we would have ended up in a place that maybe had no Koreans. But instead, Dad was from Tacoma, which very luckily, by the time we had gotten here, already had a sizable Korean community and has now grown to be like maybe the 4th or 5th largest concentration of Korean Americans in America. And so I think we have something like 30,000 Koreans. So like 300 Jewish families, but 30,000 Koreans in Tacoma. So with whole shopping malls and multiple Korean grocery stores and Korean bathhouses that we would go to and lots of Korean churches. So, it was an interesting thing for me to not only be, of course, born in Korea. By the way, one of the funniest comments I get from close friends who read the book is they're like, gosh, Angela, I didn't know you were so Korean. And I was like, it's a funny thing. And I'm like, yeah, well, I don't know. But also I think if you don't know where I grew up, and my Tacoma community kind of knows my mom and knows how I grew up, but I think if you only know me as a rabbi in New York, it's a weird thing how people want to put you in one box for your identity, and I'm in the Jewish box right now, which for many people means I don't get to be in the Korean box, or they just stop seeing it. But interestingly, when I was in the Korean community, I was not Jewish, in the sense that like I was either with my minister emos, like kind of in her church scene, or I was in the KWA Korean scene, which was definitely not at all Jewish. And it was sort of like you were to be one or the other. But I had a lot of exposure, not only to my Korean family, who I spent a lot of time with, but to this larger Korean community that was connected to my mom's Korean Women's Association work that she did, or the fact that she was an ESL teacher, and especially the first wave of students in her first decade as an ESL teacher were almost all Korean immigrants. And I remember that her Korean students would come over to our house. And then she started teaching Korean language, and those students were going to Korea with her. So I was around. I also thought my mom was like the unofficial ambassador to, of Korea in Tacoma. And so all of this meant that and Mom was very proud of Korea and told me Korean folk tales when I was going to bed at night. And of course, every meal I ate, including Shabbat dinner, was Korean food. And so it was a huge part of my growing up. And it was also a huge part of the way that I saw the world. Even though I was 100% Jewish, I didn't think of myself as Buddhist at all. But my mom's Korean and Buddhist sort of philosophy infused who I was. And you can kind of sense that if you read just the first chapter of the book, even though this is a rabbi's memoir, and I have a mini Jewish sermon in every chapter. There's a little Devar Torah or mini sermon in every single chapter where I'm teaching one Jewish concept. So it's a very Jewish book, but I begin my first chapter with the story of our first pilgrimage to Mount Rainier, and which for my mother, she made into like a spiritual pilgrimage where she was going to kind of, in some ways, infuse that sort of Korean, like shamanistic, like there's spirit in everything, we're interconnected, like I can't even explain it because my mom didn't teach it that way. It was just more that like I understood a certain sense of the spirit in everything and how we are all part of this big oneness. And that trip to the Mount Rainier was the way I wanted to express that. And then I translated into Jewish language with the Shema and the idea that God is one. And so in this weird way, I think in many ways my mom gave some of that spiritual feeling, and then my dad's Judaism gave me the spiritual language. And so that's why I started with that, because I wanted to give some expression of the fact that like everything about my kind of Korean background is a part of the Jew that I am today.
And so when you are experiencing and encountering Jews, as you mentioned them earlier, who are very cultural, because you got a lot of that Korean cultural rootedness from your mom, even if the religious part was not passed on.
Right.
So when you're experiencing Jews who are connected to their cultural identity but not their religious identity, the Jewish community has a lot of hand-wringing about
Yes.
Jews like that. And so I'm wondering how you encounter them and how, like, what you think about Jews who are connected to the culture and not so much the religion, which you and I have made our lives work.
Right, right.
Well, I mean, I think that in many ways that was the kind of Judaism that the Warnicks had. We had all of it, but I think the cultural piece was very strong. My grandmother Frida grew up in a Yiddish-speaking household. Their family had immigrated, and Frida was the first of her family to be born in America, I believe. Is that right, Dad? Yeah, I think she was. Anyway, if not the first, then the second. But her other siblings had been. Her older siblings had been born in Romania, and so to feel like there was sort of this Yiddishkeit that was in her. Frida and my grandfather Robert, they were also the kinds of people who almost all of their friends were Jewish. Even though there weren't a lot of Jews in Tacoma, they socialized almost primarily with other Jews from the community. That was sort of that era. And I'm not sure that they would say they were super religious, but it was deeply important who they were as Jews, and that was very culturally part of their language. Dad and I might differ on this. This might be the part of the book that he would say, I am religious. I would have described my dad as culturally Jewish, although he lives at Temple Bethel, if you didn't know that. He really does. And I'm so grateful to this community for what it brings to my dad's life. And it is the model of like an ideal of what a synagogue community is. But I didn't feel like my dad was coming to synagogue, to pray to God. It was more like, do you know this joke about like Mr. Cohen goes to synagogue to talk to God, but Mr. Steinberg comes to synagogue to talk to Mr. Cohen? And I would say my dad was the second type. Like I don't think that you were coming to talk to God, but he would close down the Oneg every Friday night. Like he would not leave until he had said hello to every single person that was there. And that was actually an expression of Judaism. It's a sense of peoplehood, and that you were there for community, and that's a very real part of what it is to be a Jew. And so, yes, I mean, I think as rabbis, I always want people to say, like, I want you to learn more. I want you to do more observances, mostly because I just think it gives more color and richness to your Jewish life. But I also think that there is something very deep and real about feeling like you're part of a Jewish peoplehood and the culture of it. And I think that there was a strong thickness of that culture that I felt from our family, and has been passed down through the generations.
I'm going to switch to a totally different part of the book right now. You spend a chapter talking about the situation on Shabbat when Rabbi Charlie Citron Walker and his congregants in Colleyville, Texas, were held hostage. And the hostage taker wanted to speak to you. And I feel some amount of connection, not only because Charlie was my counselor at a program, but also because I was in Pittsburgh in
When the Tree of Life
Yeah.
was shooting happened. Oh my gosh.
So that was a synagogue just down the street from my synagogue, and I also was like connected to my phone, oddly, because I was taking some of my congregants on a Shabbat hike that morning, and kept getting messages buzzing. And so that is an element of trauma that has, at least for my community in Pittsburgh, led to a lot of anxiety about being Jewish, about showing up. And so I was wondering how you build that sense of resilience and joy in Judaism for yourself, and also for people who find, especially during these times, that identifying Jewishly outside of the community can be fraught.
Yeah, I think there are some lessons about anti-Semitism, but also Jewish resilience in this story. So if you didn't know this story or haven't read it in the book, and it is a chapter that I will go into more detail, and I won't do all of the details, but I will just say that it was almost 4 years ago that a man who was a Pakistani Muslim who grew up in England, but was originally, his family was from there. He grew up on this anti-Semitic trope that Jews have a lot of influence and power and can control governments and get things that they want done. This is a very old conspiratorial sort of trope about Jews. Anyway, he believed this, so he comes all the way from England because he has a goal that he wants to free this woman who is known as one of the most notorious female terrorists in our country. Her name is Afia Siddiqui, and she's also known as Lady Al-Qaeda. Anyway, she was sitting in a federal prison in Texas. So why would this gunman go to Colleyville, Texas? Which is not a big Jewish community at all. It's because he believed that if he could go to the synagogue that was as close to this federal prison as possible, he could take Jews hostage, then call like the chief rabbi and get them to make a few phone calls and get this federal prisoner brought to the synagogue in Colleyville. That was the thinking of this man. Anyway, for whatever reasons, his Google internet research led him to call me. And so when Charlie Citron Walker called me that afternoon and said, there is an actual gunman here. He has 4 of us hostage, and he wants to speak to you. Will you please call us back? This is not a joke. I did not know Charlie Citron Walker at that point, so the first thing I did was Google, is this guy for real? And there was a Charlie Citron Walker in Colleyville, and then I was trying to look for if there was news. It was not yet in the news. I called my security director. I won't drag this story out, but essentially the next thing I know, I am on the phone with this gunman who is holding these 4 people hostage. And he proceeds to tell me that if I can get this federal prisoner to the synagogue, that no one had to get hurt, but if I didn't, that he had bombs in his backpack and that he also had bombs in New York. And he made a point of saying more than once, I want you to know that I love death more than you love life. And so this was a terrifying incident, and he said I had 1 hour to get this done. I was the only outside phone call he made. He had in England, there is a chief rabbi, so somehow he had decided that this is what role I played from Central Synagogue in New York. So, and he said, I know that all Jews have influence and power, but you especially as a rabbi of New York, he said, I saw a picture of you with President Obama. I know you're friends with President Obama. I'm not, but there was a picture of us. And he had all these kind of crazy ideas. Anyway, it was very clear that this was real, that he was holding these 4 people hostage. And if you follow the standoff, he held them for 10 hours. I won't tell you the full saga of all this, but eventually FBI came. And at one point, Charlie Citron Walker had the state of mind. First of all, he stayed so calm. He was able to talk to the terrorist for 10 hours to keep him from killing him, and any of them. But at some point, he had the state of mind to throw a chair at him, and they ran for their lives and ran to safety, and then the FBI immediately came in and killed the gunman. So this is how that story ended. I think there are a couple of things that I thought were very powerful about this moment, or that are still resonant in this moment today. One is that the FBI director after this incident happens, he gets on the TV and he says, my understanding right now is that this is not an anti-Semitic incident. And I remember thinking to myself, wow, we do not in this country understand what anti-Semitism looks like. It is not a hatred like all other hatreds. It is not only we hate Jews or we want to kill Jews. That's obviously anti-Semitic. But the idea that he didn't understand that this trope of Jews having influence and power and controlling people, that is actually an incredibly dangerous trope. That was really important it was telling, and I think we're still dealing with some of that misunderstanding about anti-Semitism today. The other thing I thought was, when a hater like that is coming after us, he's not distinguishing between Jews. He thought a female Korean non-Jew, for some people, was the chief rabbi of America, and he didn't care. So for all of us, he's not distinguishing Reform or Orthodox. We are just all Jews, and of the 4 people that he was holding hostage, one of them was not even Jewish. He was thinking about converting to Judaism. Anyway, when he was about 6 hours into this standoff, he actually turned to Rabbi Charlie Citron Walker and said, "If we get out of this alive, I'm going to definitely convert to Judaism." And he did. He got out of there alive, and he is now a Jew, which is kind of amazing. But in terms of like what we do with this and the resilience, it was a terrifying episode. I got to watch a documentary that they had actually footage from the synagogue of this whole thing, and and days after, people interviewed Charlie Citron Walker, the rabbi, and said, "Are you ever going to step foot into that synagogue again?" Because he was literally held at the synagogue for those 10 horrifying hours, and he said, "Of course I'm going back in. That's what we do. We go back in, and we choose life." And I think about that idea that there is this line in the Torah. It says, "I've set before you life and death. Choose life." Now, that might seem so obvious. Why wouldn't? Of course we would choose life. But I was listening to a gunman who literally said, "I love death more than you love life." And I thought to myself, like, sometimes it actually takes in tremendous courage to actually choose life in the face of that kind of darkness. So anyway, that was another lesson that I learned, and I thought it was very poignant that afterward, Rabbi Citron Walker could have very easily said, he actually let the stranger in. He opened the door for him, thinking he was someone who needed a cup of tea, and he made him a cup of tea and everything else before he turned a gun on them. And it would have been very easy for him to demonize and to say, we need to build up higher walls. And instead he said, "Listen, I know we can't be naive. We have to have security training. We can't be silly about this." But he said, we cannot use this as an excuse to demonize the stranger and to shut our doors on them. And I thought that was also remarkable. And also, he was all of our teacher in that moment.
Yeah, he said he would have opened the door again and given a stranger another cup of tea. One of the challenges being in a small community like Tacoma, and especially in a community that does have a lot of homegrown terrorism and especially white supremacy, is that we do have, particularly our students, but I've heard from a number of adults as well, who are very concerned about sharing that they are Jewish with their neighbors. We had a bar mitzvah recently who was afraid to invite classmates because he didn't want the classmates to know he was Jewish, and then to, in some sense, antagonize him at school. And so I'm wondering how you encourage Jewish joy and pride when people are feeling lonely and scared, just being proud to be Jewish.
Yeah, that's a tough one. And I mean, I feel like I hate feeling like we're putting the burden on a 13-year-old to feel like they have to kind of fight the anti-Semitism fight. That being said, I would say that maybe he didn't have to invite the entire class, but to begin with people that he trusted to bring them in.
He did eventually, by the way.
He did. I'm so glad, because I think that one of the best things we can do is to let them see who we are, and to bring them in and to build the relationships. And there's actually a saying in the Talmud that you can only pray in a house that has windows. And the message of that is that, first of all, perhaps that we should always be looking out and seeing what the world needs, and our prayers have to in some way connect with what the world needs. But it also is, in some ways, so people can look in and see who we are. Like, if we just shut and make really dark wall, close ourselves off and say, well, we're going to isolate ourselves and we don't want anyone to see who we are or what we do, and we do this in secret, I think in many ways that also is dangerous, and we become more different that way, in a way. And so I do think that the only thing that I think really works in terms of fighting anti-Semitism is kind of the slow and less sexy work of just building relationships, educating, helping people see who we are. Again, I don't want to say that that's only a 13-year-old's job, because that's a lot and it can be a very scary world for them. But I do think in the ways that we can help them do that one relationship at a time, that's I think every time we can change one person's mind, it gives us a sense of agency and hope, and that's what we need to do, is not to feel helpless in those moments. You notice like these days I've taken to wearing the largest, blingiest Jewish star necklace I can possibly find now, because part of it feels like a statement just to do that, and maybe also because when I walk through the world, most people don't assume I'm Jewish, and I want people to know that I am. But I think that's it's easier for me as a grown up to do that now and I think. But I hope we can give our kids, maybe more than asking them to fight anti-Semitism, the best thing we can do for our kids is to make them feel proud, joyful, literate, meaningful Jewish lives. And then that, I think, will be their best vaccination for that hatred.
Yeah, that's what we're trying to do here.
I know that's what you're doing here.
So we are getting close to the end of our time, which is very disappointing for me as I have a whole bunch more questions. But I know that there are plenty of people who have questions for you as well. Before we get there, though, you do say in your book that you ask all of your B'nai Mitzvah what makes them them, what makes you you. And so, but you didn't, I realize that the whole book is essentially what makes you you, but what makes you you?
Oh, wow. That's great. I think wearing multiple identities or holding multiple identities makes you always understand who you are through the foil of the other identity in some way. And so I've always, there have been times where I felt like I never really fit in one place or another. I guess the essence of this story, the essence of what makes me me, is that I have the heart of a stranger, which is, of course, is the name of the book. But I kind of felt like, okay, I'm biracial, I'm not really Korean. As an American, I'm always this hyphenated American. I'm Asian American, Jewish American. And then in the Jewish community, I've already told you some of the stories of the ways that I haven't always felt like I fully fit in. But I think that feeling of carrying all those multiple identities, of feeling in some ways like I could be an outsider in all of them, and yet in every one of these communities, I've also found a sense of home. Like this got to be my Jewish home that made me feel like I really belonged. And I found that in all my communities. So I think that sense of holding, knowing what it's like to feel like a stranger, which I think for the Jewish people has actually been our superpower. It's been the source of our radical empathy and our creativity and our resilience and our strength. And we often want to run from that feeling of feeling like we know what it feels like to be a stranger, because it's not always comfortable, and sometimes it's actually even deeply painful. But it is almost always the source of our growth and character building. And I think that right now, I think that there is a feeling in the Jewish community, and you just named it, that we feel a little bit more nervous. Like, it makes me very sad that Jews in Tacoma feel that way. I don't think I grew up feeling that way, but I think Jews feel that way more now everywhere, including in New York City. New York City just elected a mayor that I think makes the Jewish community very nervous. And so even in the biggest city of Jews in the country, Jews are feeling a little bit more like a stranger than we used to. But I would say that it's not just a feeling that Jews feel. I think the Asian American community, which I'm also identified with and part of, I think especially since the pandemic, has felt that there's been more hatred geared towards the Asian community than we've ever experienced before, and that's really hard. I think the African American community, it didn't take George Floyd's murder to make us realize there's still a lot of racism in America, but I think it created a reckoning that we realize how much work we still have to do. You could talk about immigrants and how immigrants are feeling demonized right now in our country and under attack, and we could go through every group. I would even argue that I think that white Christian men feel like they are misunderstood and not feeling completely, they feel like also outsiders in America in this interesting way right now. It's probably why we have the president that we have right now. So if that is the case, that literally everyone feels like we are in some ways an outsider in some setting or another, then instead of doing what I think is the kind of the most tribal instinct in us, which is to build up higher walls, to say it's us or them, to demonize the people that are not on our side, I think that the blueprint that our Torah has given us and that Jewish tradition has given us, and many cultures have also said is, no, 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 no. This means we cannot oppress the stranger because we know the heart of a stranger. We were slaves in Egypt. That's literally one of our laws that we say, and we say it on Yom Kippur, our holiest day of the year. We're reminded that we know what it feels like. And so that means we actually have to go out of our way to be compassionate for those who are in that situation. So I think that in many ways is the essence of who I am and how I am as a rabbi, but also how I walk through the world. But I actually think we're in a time that feels polarizing and difficult because I think we all feel like strangers. So let's pull back on let's pull up the Jewish story and remind ourselves that actually that feeling could be our first point of connection, of human connection with other people who most likely, if you ask them the question, they'll tell you why they also feel the same way.
Thank you so much.
We're going to take questions.
We're gonna, if you're okay
Yeah,
with
I'm
it.
up for some questions
Okay,
if we
I
want.
am going to switch my mic to you so that we
okay.
can take.
Great.
Oh, wait.
Okay.
I got one there and then one here. Give me a second.
Hi, Angela. I'm fine. So, how do you take radical empathy to the folks who were outside the synagogue a couple weeks ago in New York? Because that raises, I think, everyone's level of anxiety when that happens in New York, literally in front of the doors of the synagogue.
Yeah. I don't think that's God, you gave me such a hard question to start. I mean, I think. Yes, I know. Thank you, Greg. I babysat his children, and this is the thanks he gives me. It's a really great question. I think that the people that we perceive as our enemies, because in some ways I think that is the way we feel, by the way, I don't want to say that people who are fighting for Palestinian rights are our enemies, because that's really not what I'm saying. But people who are saying, you should be scared, and then threatening and calling for globalizing of the Intifada, those are the kinds of things that I think really feel like they are coming after us in a way that feels really very scary. I think that, listen, I think that we have a mayor who says, I will keep Jews safe, but then also says, but you shouldn't be breaking international law. That was the response of our mayor to this protest. And what he meant by that was that the fact that the synagogue was hosting a group that helps people make Aliyah to Israel if they want to make Aliyah to Israel. And the breaking of international law was the idea that they could, that some people might move to the West Bank. That's not what this organization does. They don't encourage that, but that's what happens. I mean, I guess part of what I want to say is that some of this is really taking the time, not in a moment of protest, but to really sit with people and educate them on what's happening. And I think, and that includes maybe not every protester that was there, but maybe some of the people that are organizing that. And for sure, it means sitting down with our mayor and doing that as well. So, I will say that I did meet with our mayor-elect before the election. I found some things he said encouraging and some things, much more complicated and difficult. I know that I'm on the board of the New York Board of Rabbis. They're actually meeting with him this week and doing that publicly. And I think that the point is, at this point, he is going to be our next mayor, and we're not going to just say, I think it's a problem if we say we're not going to be at the table. So I think for people like that, we need to actually be engaged in the conversation. We need to hold ourselves each accountable in a way. I'm still hopeful that there can be bridges that can be made in this. But so there's a saying: you hold your friends close and your enemies closer. So.
So in your book, you address your personal struggles with your mom not being Jewish. and that all that stems from that, the way other Jews look at you. And what pearls of wisdom might you have for kids who are Jewish in their upbringing but are adopted, and so neither parent, neither biological parent is Jewish and neither adoptive parent is Jewish, or the adoptive parents are a mix of observant and your New York secular cultural Jew?
Okay, I have two answers for that. So the first is that, I would say that my mom, she said, when I read your book, I cried every chapter. And part of it was that she said, I didn't know it was so hard. And I think that my mom felt a little bit badly, that part of it was because, I don't have a Jewish mother. But what I would say I learned from my mother is I watched my mom when she first came to America in particular. And my mom still has an accent, but there would be people who would come up to her, and as soon as she would open her mouth, they would treat her as if she were less intelligent because of her accent. Or worse than that, when I was a kid, I remember sometimes they would treat her like she was invisible, and they would just stop talking to her, and even though I was a 10-year-old, they'd start talking to me instead, and that always made me so upset. And my mother, who, if you know her, you know she's brilliant and amazing, but she somehow never lost her dignity when people did that to her. I was angry as a kid, but somehow my mom wasn't angry. It was sort of like, that's their problem. They're missing out on what I have to offer. And so I think that, so I say that because that's a starting place. Is one of the things we have to do is not let other people define who we are. And that if we can create a sense of like our own inner worth and dignity and confidence, that then you're not going to necessarily be swayed by the fact that it's their problem that they're not seeing my value. That was the first lesson I learned from my mother about that in particular. And then I would say that the second piece of this is that I think it is a really big mistake and historically incorrect to imagine that Judaism is some kind of racial bloodline. That if you are from a different kind of racial bloodline, then you can't actually be fully Jewish or 100% Jewish. There is a chapter in my book about race, but this is like, it's not just that in the Bible, when we say that we left Egypt and it's the first time that we're called a nation of Israel, it says we're a mixed multitude, which means we are from many different places. You also have to understand that anytime racialized language has been used about Jews, it was done by our enemies in order to create hierarchies of human value in which Jews would be below human value, right? So that's from Pharaoh, who used racialized language. Oh, they're going to outnumber us and they're going to overtake us. That sounds a lot like what they said in Charlottesville. Jews will not replace us, right? This idea that like the fear of Jews kind of taking over, that kind of racialized language, even though race was not a word back in the Bible, that kind of racialized language was used first by Pharaoh about us. And then in the Spanish Inquisition, they would force Jews to convert, and then they'd say, but you still have that polluted Jewish bloodline. So as if it was some kind of racialized language that was like this immutable characteristic that you couldn't escape even if you converted. And then, of course, that was taken to its, apex of evil with Nazi Germany, in which they literally had charts of like what Jewish noses looked like, as if it was like some kind of racial line. We need to stop thinking of Judaism as a race. That's not who we are, and it's actually been used to make us subhuman. And that, by the way, that's the way race has almost always been used in all of all time. If you read Isabel Wilkerson's book on caste, which I think is a must-read about understanding this, she explains this in a way that helps you understand that we shouldn't be thinking of race as a pseudoscience and it's not real. That, however, racism, which is the kind of hatred and degradation that happens because people believe race is real, that's real, unfortunately. And we have been the subjects of a lot of racism as Jews, even though I don't actually think we should think of ourselves as a race. Now, I gave this sermon 5 years ago, and I had a lot of my congregants say, Rabbi, you say we're not a race, but my 23andMe test says I'm 100% Ashkenazi. And I was like, congratulations, you're an Ashkenazi Jew. Now, does that mean then I can't be fully Jewish because I'm 50% Mongolian Korean stock because, and I'm only 50% Ashkenazi. Like the idea that we're holding on to this idea of our identity being about race is a misnomer. And then it also means that people who are adopted in from other bloodlines feel like somehow maybe I can never authentically be fully Jewish. So I'd like to offer a different definition of what it means to be a Jew. Thinking of Judaism not as a race, but thinking of Judaism as a family. And now you can be born into a family, and then it's your inheritance no matter what. You can be adopted into a family, and you are just as much a part of that family as if you were born into it. You can also create family in a way that we sometimes forget, through covenant. So I'm married to my husband. We do not share any bloodline, but he is as close a family as anyone I have in my life, and he became my family because we entered into a covenantal relationship at our marriage, which happened right on this bima. And so Judaism is a covenantal religion. We are entered into a covenant with God, and we also have a covenantal relationship with other Jews. So if that's the case, then imagine that anyone, if you convert in, you are taking that covenantal promise. Anyone who wants to be a part of this covenant gets to be fully 100% Jewish, full stop. And it's not about how much blood you have of any line or another. That's never been what Judaism's about.
Good evening. My name is Jeff, but I have a question because I empathize to something when you were on Dan Signor's podcast and you expressed the story that you told earlier about your roommate in Israel. And I guess this is a how do you deal with it question.
Yeah.
So my mother was a convert, and I've had numerous times in Orthodox, met with Orthodox men where there are 10 dudes in the room. I'm one of those 10 dudes, and we don't have a minyan. I don't hide the fact I'm proud of my mother's family. I'm proud of where they come from. My oldest son is named after my mom's mother. My family's history in America dates back to the 1720s. They are part of who I am. But how do you deal with that segment of the Jewish community? Because it's incredibly painful. I was in my early 20s when it happened to me for the first time, and I was working in the Jewish community when it happened, believe it or not. But how do you deal? Because I've seen social media where there are people trolling you over this exact issue, and
Oh, yeah,
it hurts me to hear that. Please, I'd love to hear your perspective. Thank you.
This is a very real issue for me, and I can't say that it's like all finished. Yes, I get trolled by people who will say things like, she's not a real Jew anyway, or things like that they're still there. But that, I actually totally can ignore the trollers, but it's much harder with, well, I'll tell you a story in a minute. But first, I just want to say that when I was first told that I wasn't a Jew on Bronfman, there was another person on that trip who said, "Don't worry, Angela," when I was upset about this and I was saying, "Oh, it's a problem." They said, "Don't worry, Angela, you could just convert." And I remember thinking to myself, convert to the only thing I've ever been my whole life? Like, what are you talking about? And I felt very like defensive, and also sort of like that was some kind of concession that I wasn't willing to make. I will say that if you read the book, you will see that I do go through what I call a Giur reaffirmation ceremony 5 years later, and I didn't feel like it was a concession, and I also recognized that it wasn't going to necessarily, I wasn't doing it to prove it to Orthodox Jews because they weren't going to accept that conversion anyway. I do feel, I want to say that right now, that the three rabbis who were the Beit Din, which is the rabbinic court for my conversion, are present here. Rabbi Rosenthal is present in his beautiful portrait that's right outside the door, but the other two rabbis in my Beit Din, Rabbi Jim Morrell and Rabbi David Fine, are here tonight. And I just want them to wave and just say thank you. Thank you. And I'm so grateful to them. And that ceremony, which I did when I was 21 years old at a mikveh in Seattle, was so powerful and meaningful to me. And so I guess part of what I would say is that I ended up doing that because I started to feel like, you know what, I don't want to ignore the fact that my mother's family is not Jewish. I actually want to say that I'm grateful for that, and I choose Judaism, and I've chosen it. And that in every generation, I would say anyone who is Jewish today in some ways is choosing to be Jewish, right? So I called it a reaffirmation ceremony. I had this beautiful ceremony. And I will tell you the kind of addendum to this story, which is that my children in New York all went to a Jewish day school, and they went to a pluralistic day school. And part of the reason I wanted them to go is because I wanted them to be like those super Jews that I met in other places, like my roommate, where they were fluent in Hebrew, knew how to read Talmud, and lived on a Jewish calendar, and all those things. And that's exactly what happened. Is my kids are like deeply literate, immersed Jews. Okay, my middle son is in Israel currently, and he's studying in an Orthodox yeshiva that is 90% Israelis, and the instruction is fully in Hebrew, and he is able to study Talmud 11 hours a day, which is what they do, in Hebrew. So that's my son. Well, the first week of yeshiva, which was in October, the head of the yeshiva calls him in and says, so your mom, she's pretty well known. We know who she is. So we understand that she's not a halachic Jew. And so they said, which of course, matrilineal descent, if I'm not Jewish, then my son is not Jewish. And so they said, so now on the one hand, of course, you're Jewish, and we're gonna let you stay and study here, but you can't have an aliyah or lead services or count in a minyan while you're here. So it's the same situation. And this is my son who went to 12 years of day school, is fluent in Hebrew, as I said, wants to be a rabbi, which is awesome. And he is, and now what's interesting is they said the same thing to him. They said, we would do a conversion for you right now, and you wouldn't have to do any additional instruction. And Eli said, I couldn't do that, Mom. He said, because they will only do it if I am an observant Orthodox Jew, and that's not who I am, and I'm not gonna lie about that. And I don't want them to feel like they are compromising what their worldview is or whatever. And so he's just willing. And I guess the only thing I could say is he didn't seem bothered by this at all. I was way more bothered by it. And as a Jewish mother, I also felt like kind of some guilt in some way. But I would also say that I think the big difference is that when I was challenged at age 16, I didn't feel that I had as much knowledge and confidence in some way. And I think that he does. And so this didn't shake his sense. And that's not an answer except to say that I think that for as long as there have been Jews, there have been different factions of Jews, meaning like we've never had a pope that gets to determine, Jewish practice for everyone, or be the final arbiter of the Word of God. And so that's actually a feature, not a bug, that we don't have just one way of being Jewish. So part of it is that we might have to live with the fact that we live in a world in which not every single Jew will agree with what we do. But by the way, I'm not sure I agree with what every Jew is doing in the settlements in the West Bank either. And I can say you're part of my family, and I don't have to agree or accept the way you're being Jewish right now. And that's okay, because I might have some judgment about other things, and they might have some about me, and we can still live in this world as Jews. I don't know if that's a satisfying answer, but that's where I am today.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we have to wrap up.
Okay.
But we will have a lovely dessert reception hosted by the Lamed Vav Society here at Temple that sponsors and supports Jewish education, especially scholars coming in. And you are, again, a homegrown scholar, so we are so delighted to have you here. If you have not had the opportunity to pick up Rabbi Buchdahl's book yet, there is an opportunity to purchase one here. We have King Booksellers here with us, and if you have already pre-ordered a signed copy of the book and have not picked it up yet, you can do so in our rotunda on your way out. We are so grateful to have you back here, and I hope this has been as much of a joy to be back on this bima as it has been for our community.
Homecoming. And I'm going to close with one song, if you... It's on. Okay. Okay, so this is a song that I've been closing out the talks with, and it has a little story, which is just that when the book ends by going back to Korea for my mom's 80th birthday with my daughter, and we ended up in a Buddhist temple, and when we were there, the monk, one of my emos, that we were at the retreat center with, starts bragging about, my niece is a rabbi and she met the president of the United States. And so then the Buddhist monk, who had never met a Jew before, was like, will you tell us something about Judaism? And so I told the story of the origin of the Hebrew people, the first Hebrews, Abraham and Sarah. And I said the story begins of the Jews when God calls Abraham to leave his birthplace, his homeland, everything he knows behind, to leave it, to go to a place that he does not know, so that he will be a blessing. And that story, when they cross over the river Euphrates, which is the boundary of their original home, in Hebrew, the word to cross over, ya'avor, is where the word ivri comes from. And ivri is a Hebrew. So to be a Hebrew is literally to be a boundary crosser, which is a kind of a cool idea. That and the idea there is that God doesn't allow us to begin the Jewish people from the comfort and safety of home. We actually have to know what it feels like to cross into an uncertain place, to become strangers, to know the heart of a stranger. And I'm going to guess that every one of us at some point, even if you didn't make a geographic leaving, that each one of us feels called in some moments of our lives to leave what feels very familiar and safe and to go to places that feel uncertain because we feel that somehow we will not be able to be who we're supposed to be in the world if we're not willing to make that crossing. And the irony of the story is that Abraham and Sarah have to leave their first home, their birthplace, in order to end up in the homeland, in Israel. That's where Abraham and Sarah end up. So you have to sometimes leave your first home to find your truest home. And so this song, after I said all of this, and I can feel that I'm telling this story, but it's not just Abraham and Sarah's story. It's also my story. It was also my mother's story. And I think my guess is it's all of our story at some point. Then the monk asked me if I would sing a Jewish prayer. So this is the prayer I sang, which is not a traditional Jewish prayer, but it is written by two Jews who were Tin Pan Alley songwriters in the early 30s or something like that. And things were starting to get bad in Nazi Germany, actually. And one of them was the son of a cantor. And they wrote this song about dreaming, as Jews know what it's like to be strangers in different lands, to dream of a place where they could feel like they're truly at home, because there's no place like home. Right. Somewhere over the rainbow, way up high, there's a land that I heard of once in a lullaby. Somewhere over the rainbow, skies are blue, and the dreams that you dare to dream
really do come true. Someday I'll wish upon a star and wake up where the clouds are far behind me, where troubles melt like lemon drops away above the chimney tops. That's where you'll find me, somewhere over the rainbow. Skies are blue and the dreams that you dare to dream really do come true. If happy little bluebirds fly beyond the rainbow, why, oh, why can't I? Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Please join us in the social hall for some desserts.